Yo, 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 what is up, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video. 3 years ago today, on July 6, 2019, at least on the East Coast, the league changed forever. 3 years ago today, a 19-year-old Cone was kind of chilling, probably about to go to sleep at 1:50 a.m. Eastern time, when all of a sudden he gets a notification from Woj that the Oklahoma City Thunder were trading Paul George to the Clippers for what he called a record number of draft picks, Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, to ultimately pair Paul George up with Kawhi Leonard in Los Angeles. It shook the NBA Twitter world. Most people were asleep. If you're on the East Coast, especially, a lot of people on the Pacific Coast were kind of awake, but a lot of people just woke up to this news. And for me, when I saw it still being awake, I hardly slept that night. It was a massive shift. The Thunder going from a contending approach for pretty much their entire existence to now heading towards a rebuild. Obviously, it would end up in a really successful season with Chris Paul after we traded Russell Westbrook for him later down the line, with Shea burgeoning into a superstar. It's been a really fruitful trade for the Thunder. The Clippers have also had some decent success, but it completely shook the world. And so I wanted to go ahead and look back on this trade from the perspective of a Thunder fan, kind of look back on it using what we know now, but also I want to talk about how this kind of shaped trading for potentially the rest of time. Like, it really shifted the mindset of NBA GMs when it comes to trades in a pretty big way. So make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you do enjoy. I want to start down by breaking down this trade. It was Paul George to the Clippers, and also kind of Kawhi Leonard, because he would only go there if they got Paul George, giving the Thunder a lot of leverage. But the Thunder do pick up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Gallinari, a first-round pick from the Heat, a Clippers 2022 unprotected first, a Heat 2023 protected first-round pick, and then 2 pick swaps and 2 other future Clippers picks. Some of those picks have already turned into Tre Mann and Jalen Williams, who are both really solid young pieces. Jalen has only played a couple Summer League games, but I'm really high on him. And Tre Mann had a great rookie season, showing a ridiculous amount of shot creation potential. So it's already showed out a lot for the Thunder, especially when you consider that we got a top 25 player in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, one of the best young offensive players in this league, a guy who, in my opinion, can be our franchise star when we're competing for championships in a few years. It was an incredible trade for us, for a guy who eventually wanted out after re-signing the year before, and it was a necessary rebuild. We struggled the last 2 years, losing the first round in the first year of the Paul George Russell Westbrook duo with Carmelo Anthony there to the Jazz. The next year, Dame waving goodbye over Paul George with that 3 at the buzzer. Just not a couple great years. So it made sense to make this deal. It was heartbreaking at the time because I knew it was the start of a rebuild. I knew Russ was going to be the next guy moved, and he was the player that made me fall in love with basketball, my favorite basketball player of all time. So it really was stunning. It kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't like, oh, the Thunder are rumored to be blowing things up, that Paul George was on the market. It was kind of just out of nowhere. Paul George is going to LA. There was already a lot of rumors that Kawhi could go join LeBron James and Anthony Davis on the Lakers, that maybe it was the Clippers, maybe he would stay with Toronto, but it was all up in the air. It was never like, this is kind of just waiting to happen. It just, boom, popped out of nowhere, and NBA Twitter melted down. It was absolutely absurd. And that was like one of my first days on NBA Twitter. Like, I had just joined NBA Twitter like a month earlier, so this was one of my first real experiences, and it was insane. It was a pretty crazy introduction to everything. On the Clippers side of the ball, it's still kind of up in the air depending on if they're a winner of this trade. Obviously, the Thunder got a ridiculous number of assets, so they already are a winner, but on the Clippers side of things, it depends on how much success they have. Obviously, if you look back on it now, it's still a trade that you make. You paired together Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, 2 incredible players, and if it weren't for some bad injury luck, maybe you had a chance last year to make the NBA Finals. Kawhi Leonard got hurt in the second round against the Jazz, and even going into this year, you've got one of the deepest rosters in the league. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, if they can stay healthy, are still one of the best duos in the league. They probably are going to be one of the favorites to win the championship this upcoming season. So if they end up winning a chip, none of this matters. Sure, you gave up 1 billion picks. That's going to turn into a lot of really solid young players, as well as Shea. But if you win a championship, it really does not matter. So, all in all, if the Clippers have to go back in time now, do they still make this trade? I'm sure they still do. There's no doubt in my mind they would still pair together Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Even if they don't win a chip, they've had unprecedented levels of success going to their first conference finals, and they've still got a decent shot at making a deep run in the Western Conference as one of the better teams in the league. league. So those are kind of my thoughts on the trade 3 years later. Not a ton of revolutionary things to say. It did start the era of Sam Presti hoarding picks to an unprecedented level. We saw the Russell Westbrook trade later that offseason with him going to the Rockets for 2 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps. We saw like Steven Adams get dealt for a pick, Dennis Schroeder get dealt for a pick. We saw a lot of moves get made. Al Horford was brought in later on down the line. He was traded for a pick. Like, so many different things happened over the course of those next 2 off seasons, to the point where we had, like I said, an unprecedented number of picks, and it's kind of shaped the league a little bit. You might have noticed, but really ever since that trade, the league, and especially trading in this league, has become a lot more draft pick oriented. In the past, when you look at like the biggest blockbusters of the past, it was really player centric. It was like, oh, here's 6 players and maybe a draft pick or 2 for this like superstar caliber player. Trades look like that. But now, ever since this trade where it was a record-setting number of draft picks, we've seen both more use of first-round picks, but as well as pick swaps. That's something that we've really seen an uptick in. And some examples include the Jrue Holiday trade, which was, I believe, 3 first-round picks and 3 pick swaps, with the Bucks picking up Jrue Holiday, and it worked out for them. They won a championship. The Pelicans got a ton of draft capital for a player that they were probably willing to move on from anyways. It really wasn't the time to keep him around anymore, so they ended up becoming a winner of the trade, getting a ton of draft capital, because 3 first-round picks and 3 pick swaps for Jrue Holiday is kind of absurd. That is a ton of draft capital for him, but when you look at how it changed the Bucks and how much they needed a player like him, how they ended up winning a championship, you can now say it's a win-win trade. So for them, it clearly worked out. For the Thunder, it's working out really well. And for the Clippers, even though they haven't won a championship, they look like one of the best teams in the league. So these trades have kind of worked out for the most part. Then you look at the James Harden trade, which is not working out very well, with the whole Kevin Durant wanting to leave. James Harden's already left. Kyrie Irving reportedly is going to get dealt too. And that included 3 first-round picks and 4 pick swaps, which is right around the number of picks and pick swaps that were in the Thunder trade with the Clippers. So you kind of start to see this trend when that trade goes down, of all of these teams, whenever there's a superstar player that becomes available, the first thing you hear is, oh, how many first round picks are they going to give up? We just saw the Rudy Gobert trade happen. 4 first round picks and a pick swap. And it's not just picks like recently, because you can't stack up picks every year if you didn't know, due to something called the Stepien rule. You have to put a gap between. That's when you throw in the pick swaps. But these are picks that go as far as 2029. And just on the surface, that is a lot to give up for Rudy Gobert, but it's because they hope he's going to make them a champion. If you look at Cat, Gobert, Edwards, D'Lo, like, this is a really, really solid young team with a lot of potential to grow too. Cat's really young. Anthony Edwards is young. D'Lo's young. Rudy Gobert's not that old, so he's still going to be an incredible rim protector. It's a really solid young team. And so teams have more than ever become kind of emboldened to put a lot of draft capital in these trades. It's almost become the expectation when we see a team trade, or we saw like the DeJounte Murray trade that included 3 first round picks. Like, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's still so many picks, but it's also become kind of normal. It's not surprising. When I see a guy like DeJounte Murray, who is a first-time All-Star this year, get traded for 3 first-round picks, sure, it is a little bit eyebrow-raising, but also it's kind of become the industry standard in the league, and that really is what I think the legacy is of that Thunder Clippers trade, is that I think it's really shifted how everyone looks at draft picks. They're being looked at as they are the piece that gets deals done. Obviously, you have to give up young players, you have to match salaries, but draft picks really can be thrown in a copious amount to make these trades work. Now, we have Kevin Durant, who is a superstar caliber player, top 5, top 3, whatever you want to say in the league, a guy who can dominate on any given night, one of the greatest scorers of all time, on a 4-year contract. He's probably going to get the largest draft package in history, and you know what that package is probably going to include? 6 or 7 first-round picks, pick swaps. It's going to have like a young player, like salary filler. It's going to be an absurd package. It's going to surpass the number of picks that we saw in that Thunder Clippers package. And that is because we saw that number of picks happen for Paul George. So now what are they going to expect for a guy like Kevin Durant? And there's also reports that because of the Rudy Gobert trade, that price is going up more. So it's a domino effect from what happened with that trade to the point where all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my God, we could trade this many picks to make this happen. We saw something similar years ago with the Celtics Nets trade with Kevin Garnett. We saw Paul Pierce, and since then it snowballed a little bit, and really it toppled over with this Thunder Clippers thing, and now the floodgates are almost open. Kevin Durant is going to require a ton of assets. There's rumors that the Nets declined a trade package of Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton, Cam Johnson, and 5 first-round picks. That is an insane package. Like, that is young players, that is assets, and they're just looking at it because it's probably not enough. They're looking at that Thunder Clippers trade, and they're like, they got that many picks for Paul George. You know, the Timberwolves gave up this many picks for Rudy Gobert. Like, we should get that many back, as well as young players, as well as salary filler. It really did leave a legacy of, more than ever, the pick market is completely crazy right now. Really, the only time we saw a ton of picks getting given up, like I said, back in the day, was like the Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Nets Celtics trade. And that was because you saw 2 like all-star caliber guys getting moved. Now we see one guy like DeJounte Murray get moved, it's 3 first-round picks. We see Rudy Gobert get traded, it's 4 picks and a pick swap. It is insane the number of draft picks that teams are throwing in now, and ultimately, I think that is the legacy of that trade. Obviously, also the Clippers could win a championship, and then we look at it like that. The Thunder could win a championship with Shea as our guy. We could look at it like that, as those are some legacies. But ultimately, I think the long-term effect is that draft capital thing. We saw Sam Presti now start to change the game by gathering all these draft picks, and if that ends up paying off too, that's going to shift how GMs like GM in the future. Because if Sam Presti gets like 18 draft picks, we use that to build a champion, who's to say that other GMs won't try the same thing? They won't say, I like what he did there. It was very Sam Hinkie-esque, although Sam Presti kind of went insane with it. A little more competitive, but more draft capital adding. It was a little bit different, but it was very Sam Hinkie-esque. And so Sam Presti turned that up to the extreme. And now, who knows? If that works out, other GMs could try things like this. So it really is a snowball effect. And that's kind of what I wanted to go over in this video, is just how much that trade really did kind of shape the league that we see today, and mainly the trade market. So those are my thoughts on this trade. Looking back 3 years ago, I appreciate y'all's input on this. What do you think about that trade? Looking back on it, who won, who lost? Do you think anyone won or lost? And ultimately, what do you think about the legacy of this trade? What do you think Kevin Durant is going to fetch? Like 19 first-round picks, probably. Let me know all that in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what y'all have to say. I appreciate y'all watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy. I will see you all later. Real one, say it back.